What is going on, Governor? It's Chisgule here, and today we're bringing you a concept for Rise of Kingdoms that is going to change the way that open field combat is fought. Some players have already caught on to this, others are just getting a taste of it. My friends, we're calling it Murder Ball. If you like Rise of Kingdoms videos where we talk about how to win in open field combat and wage war, you should like and subscribe because we're passionate about that, and we are a sponsored creator in Rise of Kingdoms. This concept called Murder Ball comes from actually a game called Heroes of the Storm, which is nothing at all like this. But the idea was that if you could focus everybody's time and attention into one single place all at once, you became this unstoppable, well, murder ball, basically murdering everything that came your way. And in this context, what we really mean is creating a grouping of armies all on your own to completely smash enemies and dominate the battlefield. And what we're talking about is having 5 complementary armies in the same place at the same time hitting the same thing. And of course, other players will glom along because, like, yeah, they see that you're smashing stuff, they join in for the fray. When we talk about bringing 5 armies, we talk about bringing generally troops that are complementary. The second half of this video, I'll talk exactly about what commanders and pairings I would recommend, both for advanced players and more beginning players. And this concept applies both to folks who've got the T5 at the end game, but also the folks that are making their way up to that point, in part identifying when you're up against a murder ball, and in part also contributing to, well, the mayhem of a T5 player or T4 player who is committing that many troops to the field. All of this, by the way, is made possible by the fact that, yeah, the hospital capacity in KVK is doubled because, my goodness, after just small encounters like this, we'd have like 200,000 plus troops in the hospital in just like the blink of an eye. So you got to watch that really closely with that strategy we're rocking here, and that is potentially a downside, especially if you are a lower tech player. You need to respond to murder balls and contribute 1 or 2 armies, not be the one with 5 armies. Now, when we're committing 5 armies to the battlefield in this way, a part of the magic of that level of control is that we can focus down the armies that we think are the weakest. So you can see here, we targeted a Minamoto army, boom, it was the weakest and it is destroyed. And we control the pace of the battle, at least to the point where we're not completely outnumbered. Huge part of what we need to do is position very, very strategically to keep ourselves close to the pass, to get out of danger, so that we aren't completely obliterated because, again, you can get super wrecked by having committed 5 armies to the battlefield. You really need to be very situationally aware. Otherwise, you can find yourself completely surrounded and, well, with over 600,000 troops in the hospital. You can see here we're doing that exact sort of strategic retreat I was describing, where we bring them to our pass, then turn and fight the one we actually want to fight. In this case, again, a Minamoto army getting completely squished. And what we've done here is we've brought a lot of our strongest commanders, but we've brought some amount of synergy. So let me explain. We've got 2 DPS armies. And again, we'll get into that composition a bit later on. We've got a tanky army, and we've also got a buffing and debuffing army. I guess 3 DPS armies. The buffing debuffing army is our Hannibal Barca, putting the 25% defense down, and then also the Joan of Arc, who is buffing up everyone who's in my murder ball. Now, in my perfect world, and we'll talk more about these free-to-play contributions, it will be your free-to-play contributor who brings commanders like Hannibal Barca or Ethelfled and Joan of Arc, and I'll have a card up in the top for some of those free-to-play combos that I think are really, really good, or at least some of the free-to-play commanders I think you should start with. And again, you can see we are controlling what is happening. We're controlling what certain players are doing. Other people are responding to us because we're setting the pace of the battle here. Here's another situation where, okay, so we just outnumber these players, so it's not the best illustration, but you'll see that what happens in this small series is going to be us controlling the pace of the battle by virtue of having 5 armies in a single place at a single time. And you're probably thinking, like, this is really obvious, Chisgule, right? Like, of course, 5 armies are better than 4 or than 3 or whatever. But the genesis of this strategy for me was the fact that every time I got into a situation where I had less than 5 armies, I would find myself thinking, gosh, if I only had another army or another army with different commanders, right? And I was like, well, what if I just bring them all? What if instead of just bringing my very best one or two or three armies, I bring just a boatload of troops and overwhelm folks? So in this clip, right, like we're going to sort of control where some of these players go. This player is taunting, and I've chatted with them. They're pretty chill, right? And they're trying to get me to go out of position, but I'm not worried about being out of position because I've got 5 armies, right? So if a whole bunch of people jumped out of those cities to ambush me, it's kind of like, come at me, bro. I got 5 armies. Like, I'm harder to ambush, I'm harder to catch out of position, but I'm more vulnerable if I am. So in this clip, by the way, we're going to send some armies to go kill these farmers, and we're going to use the rest of our armies as cover. So we're going to send a cavalry army to go deal with these farmers, and you're going to see that these players are going to be sort of bullied in what they can do about it. So here we've got our one army to deal with the farmers. We're watching what's happening on the other part of the battlefield. And if they come at me, which they are, now we're going to send all 4 of our armies to get in the middle, in between us and them. This was fun. So they're starting to posture. We're on their territory, by the way. So we're trying to we're being a little bit cautious about overcommitting. We're keeping our eye on the bottom part of the battlefield. And here you see, we're going to group back up into our murder ball, and they can't chase us down. They can't chase us down because we have 5 armies. So we got all those kills for free, simply because we put 4 armies on the battlefield in the other spot. Now we're going to go back down and participate in this other combat. And we're going to control what happens here too. You see a cavalry army? They're completely caught out of position here. There's no way they're getting away from this. So a part of this is essentially elevating the level of punish when an enemy gets out of position and knowing when they're out of position. Now, you might say, well, okay, Chisgule, what if the enemy does the exact same thing that you're doing? How does the combat change? At that point, it's all about picking the right targets. You need to focus down those Minamoto armies first. Those typically are the ones that are focused on doing the most damage and don't have a lot of defensive capability. So you target those, burst them down. Here you can see, boom, we're turning on somebody. All 5 armies now turning to fight someone. And it's a little challenging to control that many armies, but boom, we turn again, we hit somebody else. Constantly positioning, adjusting, hitting whoever we think is most vulnerable. And look, we force them to retreat, right? And that's a theme you're going to see. Watch, all these cavalry are now behind us. Perfect. Perfect to go and try and catch. Maybe we'll get some of them out of position. Looks like our cavalry armies, which are faster, did in fact get some free damage in. And then, as soon as we're a little bit worried about getting too far out of position, we're going to bring all those armies back down, center up on our own territory, bada boom. And then we'll send the weak armies, the ones that have taken some amount of damage, back home, and then bring some new armies back out to refresh. Okay, my friends, so hopefully you're bought into this idea of a murder ball. Maybe I've not conveyed it perfectly, but if you can bring and focus your attention with 5 of the right armies in the right place, it is savage. You control the pace of the battle. Here are the armies that I think are really important to bring because the calculus changes profoundly. Because when you've got a murder ball, you see it's no longer about march speed. You're not about micromanaging one army. You're about taking 5 armies being in the exact same place at the exact same time, so that all that really matters is that the whole ball can move together to do whatever it needs to do. Some amount of chasing is going to happen, but you want the whole group to move around together. And yeah, I guess if one army's faster than another, it can like get away better, but I don't think that's the plan. So now we value march speed still highly, but not as much as we used to, and we want a balance of power and army sustainability across all of our armies. Otherwise, you got to go back to town all the time, and then you have fewer armies out there. So unlike most situations where it's like, yeah, I want to bring, my one smashy army, you want a complement of armies. Let's explain some of the combos. In our video, we were using Minamoto with Cao Cao, so there's some amount of sustain here from Cao Cao, although I don't think this is the best combination. We were bringing Genghis Khan, I believe with Freddy, because Freddy is doing healing and lets you bring more troops, which is all about sustain. And the synergy here is just out of control with the rage reduction from Genghis Khan and the rage generation. Magnificent. Magnificent. We, of course, were bringing an archer army with Yi Seong-Ye and El Cid. And I actually don't think that's a great combination, and we'll talk about why in a bit. The disabling effect from El Cid is pretty cool, but we can do better. And I also was bringing Hannibal Barca, which I mentioned, like a free-to-play-ish player could bring a Hannibal Barca with just the first skill on it, and that debuffing it's not trivial, although I guess the expertise Barca is better for the AoE debuff, which is really strong. Decreasing the defense by 25% is huge. And the damage. Wow. Yeah, that's a really awesome debuffer. This combined with Ethelfled would just be totally nuts, by the way. And we were bringing our Joan of Arc, of course, for the buffs from the first skill, right? So if I were tweaking this now, especially given the addition of Ethelfled, there's a couple things I would change, and I toyed around with this. The first is that while I love the AoE from Yi Seong-Ye, and AoE is crucial if you're up against a bunch of folks and you want to protect yourself against that situation, I actually really like, instead of using El Cid, even if I had him expertise, instead of using El Cid, I really liked bringing Sun Tzu in that spot to support. The other place that I really enjoyed having Sun Tzu is if you knew your allies were going to bring the Joan of Arc coverage, you could do Sun Tzu with Hannibal Barca, and that gives Hannibal the thing he really needs, which is a lot more rage generation to keep those debuffs rolling really, really fast. Love that as a combination. I toyed around with the AoE coming from buy bars, because buy bars, I mean, 5 targets. 5 targets, that's pretty exceptional. That's pretty exceptional. It also is going to make the unit a lot more punchy, right? Like the 20% attack is good. I played around a little bit with Pelagius, who has sustain in healing and doesn't have AoE, but does have rage generation, which is pretty strong. What I found is that when I didn't have that balance of sustain, in particular, the Minamoto army really needs some defensive capability, that it would just get melted like that. People know to target a Minamoto, whether or not you've got a murder ball. So my recommendation with your Minamoto army would actually be to pair with a commander like Saladin, and in a perfect world, it'd be like a Saladin primary, but we don't have the stars for that. We don't have the stars for that. But, using Saladin in that way gives you a little bit of march speed, but more importantly, it gives a defense bonus, and the counterattack damage reduction and the skill damage taken reduction. Really good when you're getting focused down. So we know Minamoto is going to get focused. And this is also true. This is also true of Khan. But oh my gosh, the Khan Cao 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 combination is just so busted. I probably would just bring that. And, with the addition of Ethelfled recently into the game, this debuff is absolutely crucial. And as a free-to-play player, I would hope that you're getting, and your less powerful players are bringing Ethelfled to the battlefield to contribute this debuff to those huge group fights. If not, then I would consider putting Ethelfled, probably, since I believe that Ethelfled really cares about multiple commander types, and I think that she does benefit from I think this, even if you don't have a rally, I think that it still gets the damage increase here. I would probably pair Barca with Ethelfled and put the Joan of Arc, I don't know if you had to put it. Would I put it with Khan? Probably not with Khan. That's overkill on the rage generation. But the Joan has to be somewhere. The buffs are too good, right? Even if it means leaving a legendary commander at home, those buffs are so crucial. Now, if you are responding to one of these murder balls, you see it happen. And we had to do this a lot, by the way. We do this a lot because players like Shifty and Noon, who bring 5 T5 armies out all the time, right? You learn to see, oh, that's a murder ball. I need to not get caught out of position. What do I mean by caught out of position? When I say caught out of position, I mean that you're putting your army somewhere such that you cannot retreat strategically if the odds are no longer in your favor. You cannot strategically retreat if the odds are no longer in your favor, and frankly, the enemy can create a situation easily where the odds are not in your favor. You saw that in the video I was just showing, where someone would be in a situation where now my 5 armies could collapse on them, and to retreat, they have to walk through that mess rather than to get easily, cleanly away and to where they're going. That's what we mean by out of position. So the free-to-play contribution is going to be a grouping like Ethelfled with Joan of Arc. Huge, especially like a Joan of Arc primary. You could also do Ethelfled, although she's just more experienced to level up to get there. In fact, I would definitely prefer her as the primary. That Ethelfled Joan of Arc combination would be really exceptional. Other buffers and debuffers that you could bring to the battlefield, and this needs to be probably a video with a topic of its own, but like Boudica is a good debuffer. I'll say that you look pretty tasty as a snack with a Boudica army as the primary, so just be careful there. But, that's going to reduce the rage of the enemy and their attack. A commander and a pairing like Herman with El Cid, amazing. Supporting a murder ball, truly incredible. You bring Herman and El Cid, and boom, you are just going to knock out one target from doing stuff for 3 seconds solid. And doesn't take a whole lot more than 3 seconds for that murder ball to have melted something, right? So you remove their ability to do skill attacks, and it's just out of control. And one other commander that really contributes a lot to the battlefield is an Olgi Mundok, where you're doing a defense reduction. These are all commanders, by the way, that if you're not as in a sort of an advanced kingdom or an account as I have, and look, we were a Kingdom 51 original, right? We've been playing since September of last year. We've been around for a long time. All of these commanders I'm mentioning, if you're a high power player in an early kingdom, are very critical to bring to your murder ball because they're doing things that add synergy to the group or detract from the enemy's ability to do stuff. All that's really, really good. I think a March speed reducer is actually also a really good combination. What I want to advise against, right? And I noticed that this was a problem for me, and I need to figure out how I'm going to adjust my murder ball. But I noticed that an army like Richard and Charles have tremendous sustain, but don't accomplish much. Right? I could use that army as bait for the rest of the murder ball, and if I'm lucky, the enemy will actually target that army, but they shouldn't. They should know better, right? So I really like the debuff that's offered by Richard I. That I think is really critical, but the extra tankiness afforded by Charles Martel is honestly unnecessary. I almost think I would be better off with a murder ball, bringing Olgi Mundok as a secondary to Richard, or even swapping the order, because I think we've got the skill tree on Mundok, which, yeah, that's probably what I would do. I know it's the attack tree. No, I'm not quite as convinced, right? But you see what I'm getting at here, that the tankiness of one army doesn't matter because they're not targeting it anyways, so you may as well get extra damage from this army. And you don't care about the march speed because you're just trying to have one, not as fast moving, but insanely hard hitting group. So you're now trying to find what is the hardest hitting combination of commanders rather than what's the single best infantry army I can bring. And the single best infantry army you can bring is not actually the most meaningful contributor to a murder ball. Whew. So, my friends, hopefully this is a helpful set of ideas for you to be thinking about. Let me know in the comments, how does this change the way that you think about open field combat, if at all? If at all. A bunch of folks caught on to this already and are doing it. They always bring 5 armies and they always hit incredibly hard and really control the pace of the battle. Other folks are still catching on to this idea, and I think this could change the game for you. If you found it helpful, like and subscribe, and until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.